Welcome to Swiss Holistic Institute, inviting you to this video podcast series on spiritual elderhood. Today's issue is forgiveness practice.
Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you back to the conversation that's ongoing with two elders chronologically who are also very interested in spiritual eldership as our elderhood as a mission of our discussions. I'd like to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Thomas Rüedi from Switzerland.
Hello.
Hi. And I'm Bob Weathers from Southern California. Tomas and I converse across the pond, as we tend to say, and this has been an ongoing conversation for years now. And most recently, we've begun to record these, and you'll be seeing this probably on the YouTube channel or some other video medium. I encourage you to look at some of the topics that we've covered to date. And I hope that you can find meaning in them. There's a topic that's of special interest to Tomas and myself, and it has to do with forgiveness practice. Both of us have applied various approaches to forgiveness to deal with issues of shame and self-criticism, and we've also applied it in our work. Tomas and I have both been actively involved in coaching in our respective disciplines. Tomas as a holistic dentist and I as a recovery coach. And so there's hardly a week that goes by that the topic of forgiveness doesn't come up multiple times in the work that I do continuing. And I'll let Tomas speak of his applications of it. But I want to speak more personally, and then I want to hand the ball to Tomas. As Tomas knows, about a dozen years ago, I got into sustained recovery with success from a period of about 15 years before that, when I became increasingly addicted to alcohol and other drugs. This is public knowledge. It's on my website. The work I've done in the last dozen years has been, first of all, on myself, and then many, if not most of my clients come to me wanting to address recovery from addiction or want to help boost their recovery process. And what I found, as I've told you, Tomas, what I found to be at the very center of my own recovery, as well as the center of my work, has been addressing issues of shame and how can we reduce shame in terms of self-judgment, self-criticism, self-rejection. It's through the process, by any other term that we would use, it's through the process of forgiveness. Now, I've worked on this and developed a recording that's available on iAwake Technologies. Tomas and I are both aware of that. In fact, Tomas has listened to it and given me pointers that help deepen it. So I really appreciate that. It's a living process. And Tomas also addresses this topic and many others in his incredible book, 3 Steps into Oneness, which has just come out in the last few months, which I highly recommend. But Tomas and I, the goal here today is to speak as two individuals who are in the latter days of their careers and, for that matter, of their lives, really wanting to deepen into a process of imparting the wisdom that we've gained across a lifetime together. And we discuss that under the umbrella term of spiritual elderhood. So we welcome you to a conversation under this umbrella of spiritual elderhood today, focusing in and around forgiveness. So I'm going to hand the microphone to Tomas, and we'll just dialogue here. This is a spontaneous dialogue on a topic that both of us care a lot about.
Yes, I'm on my way to live a meaningful life for quite a long time already, and it seems that in rising up elderhood now, there is even a different meaning to many issues, especially forgiveness. So I think in these last couple of weeks, I was reflecting on saying Elderhood has three levels to cover. There is an outer level and there is an inner level, and I call it there is a secret level. So there's the outer level. You could say we take care about our I call it body houses. We brush our teeth. We do sports. We care about good food. We any support to our I call body house to respectfully live in this house, and the inner work now is much more than to reflect our mm, our inner um, screens, and I think especially in elderhood, I feel that there must there has to be very specific work to be done to release certain tensions, certain emotions, certain um, you know somehow uh, uh, things that has been uh, left behind, and there has not been time yet to really see. And I believe that elderhood is quite a different story to reflect on things, because the conditions we are into are quite different. And just one sentence about the secret word. The secret word for me is um, I would say there is a spiritual um, being in every one of us that is that we can somehow go and find within our body houses, because it lives there, but it's not, you don't see it as like a plant or like a animal. It's a different quality. And secret is because I think there's lots of work you don't tell anybody except very, very, very close friends, except because it's going to lose its power. And this is not the case for the outer and the inner work. And in the inner work, there's um, a huge issue that is called forgiveness for myself. Forgiveness to all levels. And maybe what I found working with your texts, you bring up in I Awake. Um, I felt like somehow to a little bit elaborate it to first, second, and third person in an integral way. And I felt that there are certain aspects I have to to forgive myself, directly, or I have to forgive nature, or I have to forgive, any collective, like the collective of women, or the collective of I don't know, black people, the collective of anything. So that's how I was working with it these last couple of weeks, and I'm quite amazed how rich this is.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciated, first of all, I want to thank you. I appreciate your laying this out the way that you have in terms of the outer and the inner and the secret. That's very helpful to me. I appreciate that. I have a question that I'll get to in a moment. But I want to respond to what you just said about bringing an integral perspective. Both Tomas and I are are well grounded in the work of Ken Wilber and those around Ken Wilber in so-called integral philosophy, integral spirituality, integral psychology. And Ken was the one that introduced this idea of first person, second person, third person. And when you brought that to me, in terms of your response to, in fact, I think I have it up here. Let's see. Yeah, here's the. This is the CD, the Freedom of Forgiveness that we're talking about when I awake. What I'm aware of, Tomas, is that you opened up my bias, which I hadn't thought about, is that my own practice would be in the Ken Wilber quadrant model. It would be the upper left-hand quadrant model, which is primarily or exclusively individual. So it really is tied into my bias as a psychologist by background. But what it misses is the collective, both the collective in terms of culture, which would be the lower left-hand quadrant, and I want to say the lower right-hand quadrant in terms of nature and other systems in which we're embedded. And so you really see the limitation of freedom of forgiveness. If I was going to do a part two, I'd have you do it. If I was going to do a part two, it would be to bring in collective aspects of forgiveness. And I think it's beautiful and really needed, maybe more nowadays than any other time, because there's such an awareness of collective injuries, collective trauma. And so thank you. I want to thank you for bringing in that. I think it's a really valuable expansion of the model that I introduced a few years back in this Freedom of Forgiveness tape. And if I get a chance to do a volume 2, it makes me think of like 2.0, Freedom of Forgiveness 2.0. I'd like to do it with you at least, Tomas. That'd be a pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I wanted to say is why don't we do it together? So if there's any chance to do that, so just
I suspect there is.
as an expression of our connection, of our friendship, of our of our connected souls, that every time when we meet, it's just like somehow coming home. It's something very close, very, and this is very beautiful about friendship and about really going deeply into personal work or into collective work. This has been my technique, I was picking many therapists or coaches almost everywhere in the world to work with, because I can do it most time. I can do it in English quite easily. So
absolutely.
And so it's that was my pleasure, when I've seen Bob Weathers on his homepage for, like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I don't know, something like this. Or I was looking about, working with integral coaches, and then I've seen some of these guys, and then I've seen Bob, and then with his very, very impressive tie, it was really so colorful. So it's like what was it's like a bunch of flowers, and mostly when I see ties, I get tied myself, I feel somehow tied myself, and that was a good alternative, seeing your tie with these flowers, and since then, it's so interesting that we can intuitively go into connection, and if we come along to build up trust in our intuition, and
yeah, thank you. Yeah. Tomas, I had a question for you. If I can loop back to your earlier comments, I was very touched by your talking about that secret dimension. And I'll tell you what came up for me, and I'd love to invite your reflection on it. Maybe this is a function of American religion. So I don't want to assume that it generalizes to Europe or specifically Switzerland, but my experience growing up in the United States around religion, and I certainly have my own background in American Christianity, is that one of my reactions that started pretty early on, certainly by late adolescence and young adulthood, it didn't work for me. Let me put it that way. I didn't like how familiar it was for people to talk about spirituality. And what I mean by that is that it was such a kind of public topic of conversation. Again, this may be a function of American religious expression, but it took it out of what you call the secretive and made it public. And I found myself wanting to retreat to someplace private. And so quite early on in my early 20s, I really departed from conventional religion, US style, and began meditating quietly, didn't announce it, and did that for years. Now, I trained under different teachers, went to different sanghas, different communities, but what I was hungering for is what I found was in a very different approach to spirituality than I grew up in. People have talked about the United States as just being, it doesn't matter what culture or what religious background, if you grew up in the United States, you're almost by definition a Christian, if not by belief, certainly by culture. And the fact that it's so wedded to culture in a very non-secretive way, I found really, I'm going to use a strong word, I found it offensive. And so when you talked right now about that secret dimension and tied it into spirituality, my heart soared. I really resonated with that. And so I wanted to bring that to you and invite any comment that you might have.
Yeah, as you might remember, I'm into Tibetan Buddhism for quite a while, and now some years now I can see myself in a position like a yogi, like a spiritual practitioner that is not monastic, that is not a monk, but is doing serious spiritual work. And I was really happy now with my, starting into my elderhood to somehow stumble about some really meaningful input. I was getting. I did a course about Tibetan yoga in these last months that resonated such a lot with what I have experienced in many retreats in southern India in Dzogchen monastery, where I was going, or I was following in quite a serious and quite a traditional path of Tibetan Buddhism. And within Tibetan Buddhism, and especially now in this part of the practice I'm now in, it's saying there is some parts that they are secret, or they are self-protecting, because they only are meaningful when you really open yourself to metaphysics, then and I believe that elderhood is, or the spiritual elderhood especially, is the final path to reach on a part on a part of the path into deep spirituality and really levels of deepness we hardly can speak of. It's maybe people reading my book can somehow feel or somehow sense it in there, and this is something that I really fascinated about elderhood and about that path. Yeah, so that's why I'm my setup with doing my personal work is always, having an outer part, an inner part, and a secret part every day with my day, how I set it up, and of course, in the inner part, there is lots of spiritual philosophy, lots of spiritual, exercises. They're quite meaningful, like a collective exercising, going deep with the power of a tradition,
Yes.
And without this, you cannot. It's no point to go or to try to go into the secret, because the basics are missing, or how I say, there's a path that is growing inside ourselves, doing this traditional spiritual work that is then continuing in elderhood to be a secret path that. And I feel like in the end, people that they have reached that deep spiritual elderhood, they shine like diamonds. They shine like they gloom somehow, without saying anything, just sitting there. Just, if they enter into a room and you won't see it, you will feel, your hair is getting up, in your back, because you feel there is something powerful coming, and without saying a word, and so. Yeah, so we a little bit lost our issue now for forgiveness, but
No, I don't think so. As I've been listening to you, I've been kind of holding that forgiveness almost as a musical descant. Let me respond to you by bringing in something that I think it's what I was thinking
please,
of, kind of the parallel as I was listening to you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm grateful for all. I want to take back something I said earlier, or at least expand it. I'm grateful for all the years I have in conventional Christian faith, and that was the form primarily it took. I certainly studied other religions, but I'm grateful for that because it provided kind of a structure. For example, this afternoon I meet with my friend Jim Finley, where we're studying together the work of Meister Eckhart. Now, Meister Eckhart is certainly rooted within the Christian tradition, but almost all of his teachings are in that secret place that we're talking about, or out of that secret place. The same, for that matter, with Jim Finley's books over his career. He writes out of attention to that other place. But Jim is rooted in Catholicism, as was Meister Eckhart. So I want to express gratitude for that. And I do think about that, is that it got me started on a path that helps provide the opening into the secret. So let me tie in something that came to me as I was listening to you, Tomas.
Yeah.
This morning, as I was swimming, I was aware that we would be meeting, and part of my early morning practice, as you know, is I swim every morning in a local community pool. And while I'm swimming, I practice forgiveness practice, which is very close to this particular recording. It's been modified over the last few years, but it's very similar to that. But here's something that comes up for me in elderhood, and I want to bring it. Um, what came up for me this morning was a sorrow I experienced for a period of time, which is back in my right around age 30, where I was in a period of transition, huge transition, in which I made, in hindsight, what feel like some really big mistakes. I really harmed some people unintentionally, but I nevertheless did that. Now, over the years of forgiveness practice, I've revisited that. But in the morning when I swim, I just see whatever wells up and then I follow that. So this morning, I'm going back at age, I turned 69 in a few weeks. By the way, happy birthday to you, Tomas.
Thank you. Yeah.
We both have May birthdays. And for that matter, my friend Jim Finley does too. I turned 69 in just a couple of weeks. And so I'm going back to something that happened around 40 years ago. And it welled up spontaneously. And it's something I've worked on before, but it's almost like I needed to loop back and spend a bit more time not only asking in my mind's eye forgiveness from individuals that I harmed, but also in finding forgiveness for myself for the awareness that I had as a 30-year-old, as opposed to an almost 70-year-old. And I find that kind of oscillation between present as an elder, chronologically for sure. I'll end up going from this to earlier times in my life, revisiting experiences that if I had the wisdom of a 70-year-old then, I probably wouldn't have done it. But whatever I did helps to help build what leads to a 70-year-old's wisdom. And so it's an example for me of kind of a combination of inner work, which you might say psychologically, Bob's revisiting an old wound or an old trauma, including trauma that I caused others, for which I still feel grief. And so there's the inner work, but I have to tell you, there's also the secret aspect of it, is that I feel that process of, especially for me, of self-forgiveness is rooted deeply in spirituality. To me, that's not a psychological trick or a psychological method or technique. It's really an opening into something that's beyond, in my view, something beyond ego, beyond self. And so I just wanted to give that example. It came up as I was listening to you, realizing that there's a secret dimension that's kind of interwoven inside the inner. And for that matter, if you looked at me from the outside, you just see somebody swimming. I'm conditioning my body. What's going on inside? Some part of that's inside my mind, and I would say another part is inside my soul or my spirit, and they're all intertwined. So that's what was occurring to me as I was listening to you. I took what you were saying to be very relevant to our conversation about forgiveness practice, to be honest with you. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I mean, in the end, it will be a very high goal of all of us to be in these three levels at the same time, as you said it, by swimming, that by reflecting on all of this and doing practice in these different levels, it is supposed to melt together, no? There's another thought that rised up. As you remember, in my book, I'm talking about the horizontal level of the conventional life, and there is a horizontal level that is starting by there is some relative wisdom popping up in our horizontal lives, and finally there is an absolute level meeting with these two wisdoms, the relative and absolute wisdom meeting, and in the end it's oneness. So what I realize now, just when you were talking, is what I realized is there's no point to according to my book too, to the philosophy of my book, saying there's no point to negate ourselves being into the first step into the horizontal level. And there's no point. We cannot stop eating. We cannot stop, I don't know, any kind of thing. So I was my idea was also to have to do forgiveness work on that issue, saying I'm going to be a part of myself is going to be on that horizontal, very conventional level all the time, and and I think it's good to somehow to forgive um, that there is nothing wrong with this, and spirituality for me was for many years, some years ago, was reaching a point where I can leave behind all that rubbish, and what I feel now is more to have this to have like this forgiveness practice on the first step, on the horizontal level, on the level that I go out into town, and my friend in front of myself in his car won't move, you know so it's what's happening is not really spiritual, because I get upset, and I try to, I work with this, but in the end, it's being part of that horizontal level, that and somehow to it's this is the idea, to somehow to forgive myself being still there, even though a part of me is even in secret dimensions, and there's
Yes.
nothing wrong with this. So this is what came up to myself just now.
Yeah, it's beautiful to me as a very practical example. If we're talking about forgiveness, it's just what you're just speaking into, Tomas, is to forgive oneself, is to acknowledge these three levels and how intertwined they are, and to not reject or judge any one of those dimensions, including maybe most especially the horizontal dimension. Really appreciate the example. It's a very practical example of what operating in a forgiven state of mind and spirit looks like. Is that I like there's a line out of the Persian poet Rumi where he says, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there." And as I'm saying that, I'm looking at your painting right on the wall. As you know, it's right behind here with the point right in the middle of the circle. And somehow or another, that it's all right there, all that we're talking about, the inner, the outer, the spiritual, or the secret. I think that your example is a perfect example of that field that Rumi's talking about, is that we have ideas of wrong and right. We have ideas of horizontal and vertical. We have ideas of what's spiritual and what's not. But what if there's a field out beyond all of those where they intersect mysteriously? And it seems like to me that is the domain of the secret, that it's hard to even put words to it.
Yeah, I think what I'm really fascinated about is that these when we go with these three levels, is to have them like simultaneous. This is a big issue in my book too. Is that everything is in the end, when we meet oneness, as I say, everything is simultaneous, and it doesn't bother each other. It doesn't there's nothing there that disturbs, that you know hinders us to be in that state. because it maybe if we continue forgiving ourselves, being all that, a very conventional, human being, a very reflective, inner working human being, and like soul, and that kind of spiritual being that we are all together. So yeah, so this is what really fascinates me. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had to mute the sound on my end because a printer just began printing. I'm hoping that it's not so noisy. I don't want it to interfere with what you're saying. Yeah. I think that we came full circle here in our conversation this hour, Tomas, of talking about, we started by introducing forgiveness in the context of spiritual elderhood. You very helpfully laid out 3 different entry points into the conversation. And at the end of the day, we begin to see how they're not separated from one another, that they're very much woven. And I have to say that, at least for me, I think it's something that you acknowledged too. I think earlier in my life, I saw things as much more separate. And perhaps that's necessary in terms of development. It reminds me of your fellow countryman, Carl Jung, who talked about his teacher, who was Sigmund Freud, and that he said that Freud focused on the first half of life. Jung said, I'm interested in the second half of life. And I think by the second half of life, he was talking about spiritual elderhood, that much, if not most, of Carl Jung's interest was in the second and especially the third dimensions that we're talking about. Freud and him and Jung split over this because Freud wouldn't have anything about the secret dimension.
Yeah.
And I think in the spirit of Carl Jung, what we're talking about is that in the second half of life, these things begin to come together. Freud didn't see a separation between psyche and soma, between soul and body, and certainly not between spirituality and psychotherapy. He didn't see those as separate. He saw those as interwoven. And I think that you and I are similar, especially for me in my own literal elderhood. I begin to see these things. Much of the reading I do is no longer in psychology. Much of it's in spirituality and philosophy. I think about that. It's just, that's where my interests are these days. I certainly have done a lot of reading in psychology earlier. As you've studied dentistry, psychology, politics, and so on, all of those things still have some bearing, but I find myself keenly interested in books like yours, 3 Steps into Oneness. Since it's Jim Finley's birthday this month, I'm going to give him a copy of your book.
All right. Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Because that's Jim's interest too.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Yeah. So, what came to my mind is, I would say it's a very reflecting, on elderhood in these days and these weeks. By the way, I must confess, I started to write a 4th book.
Good for you. Good for you.
I couldn't resist any longer.
Of course not. Tell us a little bit about it, then I'm going to have to move on to my next meeting. But can you give us a little preview, just a real quick preview?
As you remember, we have been talking about this really important book about elderhood, or from aging to saging, from Shachter-Shalomi and Miller, and what I felt is there's such a lot of meaning in there, and in some more like English literature. And there's just nothing in German literature. It's really it's almost painful to see how ignorant this this culture here is about what the original meaning was about elderhood. And as you told me, it's in America there is still this this knowledge about the original elderhood coming also from indigenous backgrounds, but most of the people don't recognize this in the current American society. So now, no, the motivation I'm going with this fourth book is saying I have I have to offer some really of this important and fascinating information I have to offer in German language, like translate and just connect it with my own philosophy or philosophy of Carl Jung, or well, some more people just to have something offered to the German speaking audience, because it's really a pity. There's almost nothing, and I can't stand this.
I think it's wonderful. If I can make one plea to you, I hope that it might be a book that is also translated, or perhaps you yourself, because you're quite articulate in English, that in the spirit of Three Steps into Oneness, that you might write an English version of it to accompany the German version, simply because I don't think that there are enough books in English. There's hardly a day that goes by, Tomas, and certainly not a week that goes by, when I read the New York Times or the other newspapers, other news media here in the United States, that there isn't an article about aging, and it's almost always framing elderhood as limitation and decline. And so there's very, very little out there. 99 out of 100 articles will be talking about dealing with the losses that go hand in hand with aging. Very, very little attention given, or even acknowledgement that there's something about elderhood that actually could be an enrichment of one's life in the spirit of what we've been talking about. So I would love for your book to be written not only auf Deutsch, but also auf English. Please.
Yeah, I can see another solution too. It is, you write that book,
Hey, maybe what I'll do is
or
out of
we
our,
do both,
yeah.
Yeah. Or
We'll figure that out.
we have been talking about a common project,
Yeah.
written in German and English the same time in the same book.
I love that idea. One of
We
my
will
favorite
see.
One of my favorite books of poetry, right here. One of my favorite books of poetry is by the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. It's written in Spanish, and so every poem it's in Spanish on one side and in English on the other.
I see.
I'll actually read the poems in Spanish, even though I speak very, very little Spanish. I can read it because it's the first language, and it's beautiful in Spanish. And then I read it in English, and the poetry, the translation is incredible. I also have books of Rilke's poetry, which are written in German and then in English. And so maybe we can have Dr. Tomas and Dr. Bob in the accompanying pages.
Yeah.
I think it's a very creative idea. I might take you up on that.
Yeah, so it's I mean, I'm open to almost anything,
Thank you. It's beautiful that you're doing it, and we're laughing, and who's to say what will come of this? But the fact that you're taking this on for a German speaking population when there's so little out there, I really bow to that, Tomas. I really encourage you and commend you for taking that on, and I bow to your commitment to continue. It's really what we're talking about in spiritual elderhood, that this is a time of contributing wisdom in whatever form we can. And this is a perfect example of it right here. Really, it's beautiful that you're doing it, Tomas.
Yeah, so it's that's how I do now, and yeah, so I think probably it's time to say goodbye. That you don't get into a heart attack or something similar to, because of the stress we are causing here to to your health? Because it should be the other way around, no?
It is the other way around. I do have to go because of my work, but our meeting gives me energy for the day for my work, and I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be with you, Tomas. I really appreciate our diving into forgiveness today, just in the ways that we have, and I look forward to our next dialogue together. It'll be a pleasure. Always is, Tomas.
Yeah, thank you.